Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and all of those who are attending today's Wildlife Week show. We are live and on the air. As you saw, I did a very quick scene change. Got from Florida to New York City in about 4 seconds. And that's a fantastic world that we are now living in virtually. So, as we have people coming in, we're going to give it just a minute or two for people to get comfortable and seated in their area. I see attendees are continuing to roll in. But we are very lucky today to have two fantastic presenters that are acclaimed photographers. We are going to start the day with Jennifer Vitanzo, and she is an all-around amazing artist, author, musician. There's a lot of things that I could continue to spend the entire hour giving her accolades on. However, when we get her on, we will look at some images, have a dialogue and discussion regarding intent and purpose, as well as all things conservation and related to what gives us the ability to maintain and keep the fantastic wildlife around our planet for us to photograph. So let's see if we can get Jennifer on. How are we doing? Well, I see you've changed over, Jennifer.
I'm here.
Good afternoon.
Good
And
afternoon.
it's so very good to see you. So for all of the attendees that are in the room, this is a live open discussion. So feel free in the chat as well as in the Q&A to drop any comments, any type of questions that you may have. We're really going to have a casual open dialogue regarding process, intent, as well as imagery. So if something really strikes you as we are having this conversation, I'll do my best to try and implement it and interject throughout the conversation where I see fit, but it is being monitored and we have a moderator as well as myself looking at everything. So first and foremost, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited to have this conversation and share all these crazy, ridiculous stories. I feel like 8 years of doing this, it's got to be worth some good stories, and I certainly have a few.
Well, for the attendees that are here, if you do not know, Jennifer, you're an author as well. And
Yeah,
once I
yeah.
spoke with you, I looked up your book on Amazon, and I have a 10-year-old daughter, and it was 100% perfectly geared towards her. So
Awesome.
we will be able to touch on that a little bit as well, because I can tell you that it was something that was of great interest in my family as we looked through and saw everything that you had on there.
Awesome. That's so exciting. Yeah, that was actually a really fun book to write. Somebody was asking me, like, was it easy to write, or wasn't it hard to write a book? And I said it was based on a true story. So honestly, I just wrote it down. Like, easiest book ever to write. Like, it happened. I wrote
Right.
it. End of story.
And for all of the authors that are out there, they're just gonna be like, oh yeah, it's super
Yeah.
easy.
No, I didn't. The thing is, I didn't really have to make much up. That was the thing. It's like it didn't take all so much. Like, I've always been fascinated by people that create these worlds from nothing. I took what was already there and just kind of literally put it on a page. So I feel like I cheated.
Look, sometimes that's the best thing, right? We use our artistic abilities to be able to put it out what is close to us or what we wish it could be.
Yeah.
So I don't consider it cheating. I just consider you are a very artistic person.
Thank you.
But before we really get going, I just wanted to give you an idea of exactly who's here. We've got everybody hailing from California, Pennsylvania. We've got some people from Texas, Brooklyn, all the way out to Reno, Nevada. We've got someone from, well, you know what? I have to say, though, I think Andy Wynn's coming 40 miles west of London.
London,
It's a
nice.
little bit more out there, but a lot of different people from all over the world. So we're going to have a fantastic presentation. So whenever you're ready to take over and screen share,
Sure.
we are happy to allow you to do that. And then we will just begin looking at, hold on, I'm sorry.
Oh, Nepal. Whoa.
I mispronounced
Okay.
your name, but Robin from Nepal. How's the internet in Nepal? Well, there we go.
Slow.
All right, so
Good. Well, hey, he's on. That's better than my internet was in South Africa most of the time. I wouldn't have been able to watch this where I was.
That's amazing. Well, welcome. And I'm going to let the person that you actually came here to see, not myself, take over and begin to show you some images. Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so I put together a little group of pictures for you with a little bit of a story. So a lot of the work that I do is with wildlife conservation. My photography was essentially based on living on game reserves and doing quite a bit of work. Can you see this? Can you see
Yes.
the picture? Okay,
Yep.
so a little lovely baboon staring at you. One of my buddies in the Cape Town area, mostly the nemesis of people in Cape Town, but they are pretty fascinating and amazing creatures. And it ties into the story of art for a cause. So much of conservation in so many industries, I find, are very much predicated on the terminology in the industry. And if you're not in the industry, you might not understand. And particularly with conservation that is so connected with science, obviously. And science has a lot of big 12-syllable words that most people do not understand, me included, most of the time. And so what was always very challenging with a lot of the issues that we were running into were there wasn't a good play between what was going on in the field and getting it across to the public in a way that the public was really able to ingest and understand. And not because anyone is just not capable, but simply because the terminology being used was not, it just wasn't common language. And so there was a bit of a disconnect and a lot of people just being confused. And the thing is, with anything in life, you're never going to care about it if you don't know about it. So, you got to know about it first. And so with regards to photography, as a photographer, we have this incredible ability to take real life and show it to people for things that they might never see themselves. Like, not too many people are going to get to be able to walk amongst baboons in the Cape Peninsula, but they can see an image of it. And it's rather than it being a cartoon or it's a real indication of something that actually exists. And it also gives you this ability to tell a story without telling the story straight to someone and forcing them to interpret it a certain way. You have the ability to take these incredible animals, these issues, and turn them into stories that you want to craft. So with regards to monkeys and apes and baboons, which are all monkeys and apes, one of the things that was always fascinating about them is they're so similar. Obviously, we're all primates. We're very similar. There's, I think, like a 2% difference between chimpanzees and bonobos and us. And it is really fascinating to watch these animals interact. They're so, there's this, that issue with anthropomorphizing things, and everybody, not everybody, but there are a lot of camps that don't like giving animals human quality, so to speak, although animals are human, so we really all have them. But there is, if you sit and watch these animals, it is impossible to not see them and think they're thinking. They're figuring things out there. And to bring them into a light where we can find common ground makes it a lot easier for people, once again, to care about them. When you see something caring for its family, you start to find, it's a strange thing that just happens with us psychologically, that we start having a sort of kinship with them and barriers start falling down. With regards to the photography in general, the whole purpose of it with regards to art for a cause is creating this connection to things. And that's the first step in all of this, is creating a connection, is connecting people to whatever the cause is, whether you're connecting them to a specific animal that's at risk, a specific issue like habitat loss, the debate with regards to eating meat, not eating meat, like how it all factors in. Trophy hunting is another one. None of it is black and white. And so essentially, to be able to have conversations with people and get people to care about things, you have to find common ground, and you have to, show them that these things are important and these are the reasons they affect them. It's not just there's a rhino getting poached on the other side of the world, and why does that matter to me in California? Well, all of these things are interconnected. And so the goal is to start showing this connection so that people can start seeing how each individual action creates a reaction, that whole butterfly effect somewhere else on the other side of the world. So the next thing is creating then compassion with these animals. Obviously, everybody, I don't know anybody who doesn't love American.
Those are gorgeous.
They are adorable. They are so funny. And I worked with them for a year in the Kalahari. I got so close to the meerkats in the Kalahari that I actually eventually got accepted into their group, and they would start anal pasting my shoes, which, let me tell you, you don't want that. You want to be accepted, but not that accepted, because the smell does not come out, and it smells horrible. But it's fascinating to sit and watch these animals that, they're very different than us. They're still mammals, but they're still very different. They can recognize each other's voices. They actually can individually identify each other. They sit with each other and like the young ones will actually have a mentor as they get older that teaches them. They teach them how to hunt. They teach them the different calls that they need to be aware of, whether it's a terrestrial predator, whether it's an aerial predator. It is really fascinating just to see the interaction. And it's like watching a miniature, like the whole show Meerkat Manor that was on, I don't know, about 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's like watching a soap opera, but with smaller, if we shrunk humans down and put them in onesies with a lot of fur, it's just like, and they squeaked instead of having, our language. It is really kind of fascinating. And again, it's building these connections and showing the compassion with stuff that is not us, but has so many similarities with us.
Yeah.
Same thing. People think, we traditionally look at lions like these giant predators that are, killing everything. And the reality is big cats are just like your house cats. They do a lot of the same things. They sleep most of the day. They groom each other. They have, lions are specific with special with cats because they're the few social ones. Most cats are solitary, but they're not these mindless predators that are just out to just kill whatever they see. They have these social dynamics. They have these ties. Giraffe, wild dog are actually great. I love them. And the wild dog are one of those species that a lot of people don't even know about. I mean, people that work in conservation are like, oh, what is it? Just a feral dog? And I'm like, no, it's actually a species of animal. It's a specific species. It's also sometimes called the African wolf or the African painted dog. They're critically endangered. There's only about, I don't know, like 4,000 or 5,000 left in the world, I think. But again, huge social hierarchy and really interesting family dynamics. And they get persecuted because they need large areas of land to live. And people have been, like, a lot of people have blamed them for killing livestock, when I'm sure like they may have here and there, but for the most part, the livestock is often getting killed by feral dogs, not actual wild dogs, which again, they need to change the name, by the way, because it's very confusing. But
We'll see what we can do at
giraffe.
the end of this presentation to, if we can make that happen.
Yeah, right. Anybody listening, please, let's change their name. Because I think African painted wolf is really cool.
Mhm.
Or painted wolf. I don't know, something else. Because wild dog just seems like it's a wild, I don't know. Anyway, if anyone's listening. But again, another thing, giraffe. People just assume, you look at an African, you think of Serengeti, you think of any sort of classic African wildlife and landscape, you think of giraffe. You always see giraffe. Well, giraffe are actually kind of like they're essentially silently going endangered because they're losing habitat, they're being shot out, too much are being taken for trophy, too much are being taken for wildlife trade. So these animals that are iconic species are disappearing right under our noses, and we just assume they're all there. But again, it's drawing the awareness and the understanding about things and explaining and educating people about what's going on out there, so then they can actively make changes necessary to ensure that these things survive. And not just because they're amazing animals, but because it's all this incredible balance and everything affects everything else. So a really good example with regards, and by the way, if you want to interject and just have questions about any of this stuff to just go into more, please just shut me up.
Well, I will say that Amber just said in her local zoo, they do call them the African painted dogs. But she thinks the African painted pups sounds better.
And if you change it to puppies, then everyone will love them. Honestly,
Right.
It's like owls, baby owl. This is, I think, is the funniest thing. Baby owls are called owlets, but there are also species of owls called owlets. And I'm like, guys, let's get it. Like, come on. But an owlet is adorable. Like, what a cute name. They should call it a puplet.
Right.
Anything with let at the end will automatically. So rhino is a really interesting topic because there's so many things that factor into the rhino situation. And if anyone is not aware of the rhino situation, rhinos are obviously getting heavily poached, particularly for the traditional Chinese medicine, or traditional medicine, not necessarily even Chinese, but traditional medicine for essentially ego, for lack of a better way of putting it. They're seen as a status symbol, the horn. And there's a lot of stuff around it because the horn is essentially worth more than gold right now, in terms of the value of it. It is a black market item. You cannot trade in rhino horn. It is actually illegal, but the black market is massive. And people will say to me often, well, why do I care? It's in Africa. One of the largest black market black markets in the world for wildlife trade is in the United States. I think we are the second or third largest illegal wildlife trade hub in the world. So it is our problem. So, and not, I mean, just that it's, potentially Americans perpetuating it in the sense of us having this huge market here, but also because so much of what we buy is predicated on where these animals live. So cell phones, all the mining for a lot of, not all of, but a lot of the mining for things like technology comes from areas where a lot of these animals exist. And in order to get to where the mining is, a lot of times, a lot of these areas they're cut out. All the animals are moved out. Habitat gets lost or destroyed. Pollution, we've got to put the stuff somewhere when we're done with it. And, when we make things functionally obsolete in a year's time or 2 years' time, we're now getting something else and putting whatever we had in another space. And so we're running out of space. We're knocking them out of their habitat. We're polluting more of where their habitat is. And that's a global thing. Everybody around the world has cell phones. Everyone around the world I'm on a computer. I have camera. Like, I know it's all, but it's, again, all interrelated. And there's an argument that because rhino horn can grow back if you don't cut it down too far, which is legitimately true, because rhino horns do actually break off in the wild, that it's fine. It's sort of a renewable resource. But I feel like when we start looking at animals like a resource like that, one, we start minimizing their actual inherent value. And two, we do things like interfering with what nature actually is. Like, the rhinos have a horn for a reason. They do use it. If you look at the picture on the left, that's a female rhino is in the foreground and a male rhino is in the background. She was actually going head to head with the rhino because she was protecting her calf. They use it for defense. They use it for defense against other animals. This little one in the middle was actually a rhino whose mother had been poached, and they had taken him into one of a lot of the larger reserves have a game capture area where some of the animals, if they've been injured or whatever, or they need to be relocated, will be kept for a while until they can be moved to another place or until they're old enough that they can be re-released. The picture on the top right is another baby rhino. It's just the eye. It's a weird angle. That one's mother was also poached, and the baby died about 2 weeks later, just almost like a heartbreak. I mean, when I went to see these animals, you could hear this little one was just crying. It would just cry. And they cry like humans cry, this high-pitched wail. The two on the bottom right are two rhino, they're brothers. The one on the right is the younger one. Again, mother was poached. And you can see those two, their horns have actually been shaved down a bit. It is traumatizing. I mean, this is truly what a rhino horn, and it's, they dart the rhino. So the rhino is tranquilized, but they have to capture the rhino. That's the first thing. So the first picture is an animal that's actually in one of the capture containers. He's been darted. He's been put in the container. When they take them out, they cover their ears. They clog their ears. They cover their eyes to try to calm them at least a little bit. But this is a process, and then how odd to see a rhino in the African veldt with no horn, it's just not natural, it's just, and I understand, again, the drama and the tension of, well, if that's how we're going to protect them, then we do what we need to do. And again, I agree with that to a degree, but I also feel like if we can start changing the attitudes around it, then will we have to do that? Will we have to actually dehorn them?
Yeah. I have a question for you as we've been moving forward. And I know we have a pretty good amount of the presentation left, but as I'm looking at each of these images, there is a compassion inherently drawn in the way that you're composing and photographing these animals. And, I hate to use the word personification, like you were saying, but more of showing a true personality. You led with the baboon almost in a beauty shoot. I've never seen a baboon photographed in such a romantic way. But also at the same time, it took it, like you said, with the lionesses cleaning each other, it took it out of the Mutual of Omaha documenting just so that people can see what's out there. And it took it into a fine art form. And each of these images that you're shooting, even with the rhino, justified far to the right, they're just so inherently beautiful. And it seems as though you almost have an emotional connection versus a anthropological documentation with each of these animals.
That's really my goal, honestly. I have always been, I mean, I love the sweeping vistas. I love the iconic shots of the animals, and I certainly have them. But for me, what has always drawn me to this and the way that I like to photograph wildlife or anything actually is to really show the inherent soul. I guess soul is maybe the right word. I'm not sure. But just that everything has a personality, everything. And I would have never believed that until I actually was telling you I raised that a praying mantis, which is what the book is about. I would have never thought an insect had much of a personality until I spent a year with a praying mantis, and they do. And each species has a sort of a sense about it, much like humans have a sense about them. We are a very social species. We need to be around each other. Some of us more so than others, but it is truly within our DNA that we are social. Some animals are more comfortable being by themselves, but within each species, each individual animal has its own, it just goes through its own experience, its own life. And I feel like truly connecting with the animal and connecting it to people is to show that, and like you said, I don't want to say humanity because it isn't necessarily humanity, but it is the sense of connection between us. It is the line that connects all of us, which is, you know, for a long time there was a belief that fish don't have an emotion, or fish don't have emotions, and birds don't have emotion, and reptiles, but they do. They have now done tons of research. There's actually a fascinating book called The Genius of Birds that I finished a few months ago that and I've spent a lot of time with birds, and it completely threw everything that I knew about birds on its head. It's just, there's so much going on that we are just scratching the surface of and really starting to understand, because we are starting to see these animals more as living beings, not just as suits us and are something to see, but as living beings that exist and have their own lives. And that's what I think I love about my little pangolin friend. I love about being out there and doing what I do is I love to show the personality, the little intimate moments, because that's what makes life, you know, whether we're a human being or we're a meerkat, or like you said, the lioness is licking each other, or they're grooming each other. Those are just moments in a sort of slice of life. And we've done such an amazing job of isolating ourselves from the rest of the world and the rest of the species of the world and the rest of the natural world, that I feel like we've created this massive disconnect with everything around us and how interconnected it all is, and we are with it. Like a pangolin is a perfect example. It's such an alien sort of species. And most people, there are 8 different species of pangolin. There's 4 in Africa and 4 in Asia. This is a Temminck's ground pangolin, and you find them in South Africa. And this is the most highly, aside from humans, which sounds wrong, but and it is on many levels, but it is the most highly trafficked animal in the world after humans, which is awful in its own right. Which is what I was trying to say, and said that horribly uncouthly before.
I was following
you. Yeah, but most people are like, what is a pangolin? I'm like, it's like an artichoke. An artichoke mammal. But they're the coolest little things. They are just so gentle, and they just kind of mission about eating their termites and ants, and mostly nocturnal, so you don't see them a whole lot during the day. You have to actively go out and find them, which is why I cannot believe that these things are so heavily trafficked, because it's impossible to find them. But nobody knows what they are. They're not, like, they're learning now because there's been more knowledge put out there about them and what's going on with them. But you know, you look at this and you think, what is that? And how in any way, shape, or form would I have any connection with that? Well, it's a mammal. It's a warm-blooded animal. And I don't have a picture with a baby. I wish I had one, but I don't have a picture with a baby. But the mothers carry the little babies on their back. It's just, I mean, there's certainly such a connection, and it's, you know, I don't know. I'm also like, I wax poetic about all these things.
I was gonna say, it looks like an armadillo going into battle.
It does. Well, and they're very similar to things like armadillos, but armadillos are New World, so they're only in the North America and South America, and pangolin are only Asia and Africa. And they are technically, they're separate, although they are it's almost like, you know, some species that look pretty much the same have evolved in different areas to fill the sort of the same purpose. You know, they eat the termites and ants, same kind of thing. It's incredible how that's happened. It's like something had to fill that niche. So they found something to fill that niche, and they just happen to look like each other, even though they're not technically related. So, but I'm a big fan, if you haven't noticed, of also the underdog. The animals that people traditionally either are afraid of or afraid of or just dislike because they're not pretty, they're not, whatever. And they're, vultures often are persecuted because the one we look at them, we think, oh, they're awful and they eat dead things. But if we don't have vultures, most of us would be dying of botulism. They
Mhm.
eat the carrion, they eat what is left over, and they prevent diseases from spreading. They're nature. We call them nature's undertakers,
Yeah.
and they're real. Again, these guys have this incredible, fascinating social structure within the species, and then um, within multiple species, if you see them actually at a kill, you'll see that certain, if you look at their beaks, I don't have a lot of pictures of them. The one on the picture on the right is not actually it's not a vulture, it's a ground hornbill. But people also have a habit of, I learned in South Africa that they conflate the two. And I'm like, no, they're very different. Hornbill on the right is like Zazu in the Lion King. It's
Mhm.
one of those species. But so vultures have, each type of vulture has a different kind of beak, and the way their feathers are set on their heads, and it just essentially their whole physiognomy. Their beaks are created for a specific purpose. Some of them have very short pointed beaks, and those are the ones who can go in, and they have like very bald heads. They can go into the carcasses and get the little tiny pieces of meat off, and they can get in through the bones. And some of them have beaks like this one, which are more for ripping and tearing things open. And when you see them at a kill, there's actually a hierarchy within the different species of when they go into to eat. And this way, where the first one comes in, the first species comes in and they tear everything apart and they tear it open, and then they'll eat. And then the next ones will come in and they're the ones that can get into the smaller areas. And then the next ones will come in and they're the ones that actually eat the entrails. This is very lovely and graphic, but it is what it is.
Right.
But they're funny because it's like they literally sit and patiently wait their turn. It's fascinating.
Mhm.
But we look at them and we're like, oh, they're ugly. They're this. They're really incredible, charismatic animals that we've very much. There are traditional beliefs that they can be persecuted because some people, some beliefs are that they are portends of death. Some beliefs are that you can see the future with them, and so they will be persecuted in the sense of the wildlife trait of they want a vulture foot because that can predict the future, or they want to kill the vulture because it's indicating that someone is going to die. And so there's and they get poisoned. People poison carcasses because they want to get rid of lions or whatever, and then these guys end up eating it, and then they die, and then so many factors. But again, it's we're forgetting how each one of our actions is influencing all of these other animals around us, and how that is then re-influencing us because it comes back around.
Right.
So when we don't have them to clean the mess up in terms of dead things, then we are of more disease floating around,
Right.
which is obviously going to affect us. So yeah,
Would that lead in? I have a question for you regarding intent and execution, or the beginning of a journey, morphing and evolving into another thing. Listening to you, I feel that there is a ton of passion, a ton of study, and a ton of investment of your life into every direction these rabbit holes go, which I'm sure we could do vultures for an hour, and then
oh
we could do lionesses for an hour, and then we could break down all these things. But was this something that drew you into the photography, or is this a product of the photography?
I think they feed each other. It might be a chicken and an egg kind of situation. Um, I got my first camera when I think I was about 9 years old. My dad got me this little plastic underwater camera that I don't even remember who made it. It used film. But I loved it because it gave me the opportunity to be able to go underwater and take pictures of, and I'd always been fascinated by animals too. Like if there is an animal nearby, I was the one touching it, which is not every parent's dream, because I was like, I want to go, I want to pet everything, and not everything wants to be pet. Um, so, but I think, I think a lot of it has to do with, I'm a youngest child. I have four brothers and sisters, but there's a big age gap between us. And so I spent a lot of time in my childhood alone, even though I had four older siblings. But my brothers were 2 years apart, and they were like 6 and 8 years older. My sisters are 16 years older than me. They're twins. They have each other. So essentially it was like, fend for yourself and figure things out. And so what I would do is spend a lot of time alone. And I just liked exploring and figuring things out. And I am definitely that person that has to go out and do it. Like if I read about it, and I was fascinated, like I started reading with National Geographic, which is not really what like a 3-year-old or 4-year-old is supposed to be reading, because I didn't know what I was reading about, but I loved the pictures and
Right.
so I cut my teeth reading National Geographic as a little tiny kid. But as soon as I read about it, I wanted to do it and I wanted to
Mhm.
see it. And I was fascinated by how these pictures were drawing you in, because it wasn't
Mhm.
just the words. Like I could use my imagination, but to be able to imagine things while also having an image to put into the places I was imagining, because I had the image in front of me and could see what it really was,
Right.
that was like my brain was exploding, because it was opening this whole world of all this incredible stuff that's out there, and I want to see it all and I want to experience it all. And my standing joke is that, some people read about things and they're content. Some people like, they like to do things, but they do it, they learn first and then they do. I'm the person who pees on the electric fence to figure out how it works. I'm like, okay, don't do that again. um I
That
just
that is
wanted.
going to be the quote of Wildlife Week. Thank you for starting Wildlife Week off with the quote that we will have as a headline. I
Well,
appreciate
I'm
that.
glad I kicked it off. So it's I can't say that one necessarily led the other. I feel like they really evolved together.
Right.
Before I had a camera, I would draw. I loved to
Mhm.
draw, and I would write, and I would write stories. And I joke because the first poem that I ever wrote, I think I was in like 3rd grade when we first were learning about poetry. And I was writing about the California condor and how DDT is killing them all. I'm like, oh my God. My parents were like, who is this child? And then my first song that I ever wrote, I think I was in 7th or 8th grade, and it was about protecting the ocean. And I was like, it was bound to eventually evolve into this, I think, at some point.
Sure. And
They
the
were
the
both there
reason
from the
the
beginning.
reason I bring this up and I ask this question is it seems to be a very, I don't want to say polarized. That's a very inaccurate word that draws a hard line. But there seems to be, to your point, of the people that plan and research and execute, or the people that execute and learn along the way. And you seem to have this inability, or excuse me, this ability I've not seen in very many people, to where you're almost this morph of, you would have been as well suited entering into King Tut's tomb with a journal as you have been with a sketch pad. It just seems like you could sketch it versus drawing, or excuse me, versus photographing it. And to your point, you said that you started out sketching as well.
Yeah.
One thing that we do have from Brian, which I found very interesting, and maybe we could speak on this before we move forward while we still have the vulture up, but he says that he has friends that have a pair of vultures that return to nest in their barn and coexist with their goats and pigs and hatch and raise their babies annually. They're quite enamored with them, friendly and loving birds despite their appearance.
Yes,
So
they are. They are
that's
incredible with their young. Yeah. And that, Brian, you just made my day. Because that's the stuff that we try to get out there to people to understand is it's so easy because of what something looks like, I think, to just pin, and also the way we've characterized them in media. The vulture is always the bad guy or whatever. It's like
mhm,
all the bad guys in American movies have British accents. It's like all the bad guys in animal movies are like hyena and vultures, but they're not. Vultures and hyenas. Hyena is my favorite. Spotted
yeah.
hyenas, hands down, my favorite animal. At least in Africa. And they're really fascinating, incredible animals that are very nurturing to their young. They're very nurturing. They are very socially oriented, and we don't see them that way because that's just not. I don't know if it's we just didn't want to see them that way, and
Mhm,
so we just started depicting them a certain way, and it's just stuck. Or
sure.
if I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of it. I think a lot of it is they're not so as pretty, and I hate to say that, but that is something that does influence us.
Mhm. No, I,
Frustrating.
I I agree. I grew up in Florida, and there were vultures on the side of every interstate my entire life. When we would go out hiking, they were eating everything that could be. And knowing what I know now as an adult and what you said, I was incorrect, but I was the guy throwing rocks at them because they look like demon birds
Right.
chasing us as teenagers through the woods. That's a fantastic segue into a question that we received regarding the ability for these animals to have such a relationship with their family unit. Mike G asks, is it true that elephants go through mourning when one dies, and have you ever seen that reaction
Yes.
with other animals?
I have seen it with dogs. I have seen it with elephants. I've seen it with hyena. I've seen it with birds. I've seen it with crows. Um, I don't know that I would. People again, you don't know what's necessarily in their head, so we may be projecting to some degree. But it is very hard when you sit and watch you know, when a mother elephant has either a stillborn baby or the baby is attacked by something and ends up getting killed, that the mother will come and the whole herd will come back around, and they will gather around, and they will very, very gently with their tusk, and those tusks, I think there's something like, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't necessarily quote me, but I think elephant tusks alone have 400,000 muscles in them. I think the human body is 600 total. So just the trunk. They are so unbelievably dexterous with it. And you will see them and they will literally be caressing and petting the animal, and they just put their heads down next to it. And you hear their vocalizations change, their entire mannerism changes. And it is like, and then you'll see them surrounding the mother, you know, whoever's baby with the mother, they will go and comfort the mother. I've seen it with baboons. My favorite baboon was a little baboon we called Dobby, because she ended up having, I don't know what, she was born with all of her hair. And then it just started falling out. She had some sort of weird alopecia. It eventually started coming back in again. But so she was, you know, a random normal baboon. And then suddenly she was bald. So we ended up calling her Dobby, like the little character from Harry Potter, because that's what she looked like. And she was such a spunky little thing. She was so cute, and she didn't let it stop her. She did not care. She just did whatever she wanted to do. And at one point it was it was really actually traumatizing. The mother was not, so baboons have a hierarchy ranking. So if you are a female baboon that is of a low rank, you are going to be ranked lower than even the baby of a higher ranked female. So you know, it's a weird ranking system. Dobby's mom was sort of in the like probably middle to low end. And so there was a male who essentially got angry at the mother and was chasing her, and she was holding the baby, and the baby ended up, it was horrible, getting caught on a fence, and just, you can imagine, it just did not go well. And the baby died. She carried her around for like 5 or 6 days. She just carried the body, and the other baboons would come up to her and you'd see them. It was almost like they were petting her face, practically putting their arms. I mean, you know, it's hard to believe unless you watch it. And I think sometimes people hear the stories and like that, you're making that up. Like, no, this is truly, you know, what they would do. They would sit, they would comfort each other. When young baboons get scared, an older baboon would often take them and like hold on to them or give them a hug, or just, you know, it's not just humans. And right. It is even the animals that we would never expect, you know, like birds look like dinosaurs, because they are. But they don't seem like they'd be warm and fuzzy. Reptiles don't seem warm and fuzzy, and yet a female crocodile, they will care for their young, and they will very gently carry their young and protect their young. Those jaws, which are some of the strongest jaws on the planet, will very gingerly pick up their babies and move them from point A to point B. They just, wow. You know, yeah, it's, again, it's very easy to separate ourselves. And when you start breaking down those walls, you start realizing that we, again, have more in common than we don't.
Sure. And I know we do have some more images to go through, but there is one relevant question before we get too much past the photograph. But Mario asked, I probably missed it, but why are the pangolins hunted so much?
Pangolins are hunted for mostly for, again, traditional medicine, and also they're considered a delicacy for the food. Pangolin meat is considered a delicacy in Asia, and it's just one of those things where it's a status symbol. And the pangolin scales, which actually like rhino horn, which it's so interesting that it's the same thing. They're made of keratin, which is the same thing as our hair and our fingernails. It's all comes from the same stuff. They grind it down, and it's used in traditional medicine. So the scales are also ground down to be used in traditional medicine. With regard to the horn with rhino, it's ground down for that, and it's also used to make things like dagger handles and cups and jewelry. But again, it's keratin. So you'd have the same effect if you ground down your fingernails and snorted them as you would if you ground down a rhino horn or a pangolin scale and did the same thing, or drank it in a tonic. There is no medicinal value to it, and they have struck it from the traditional Chinese medicine, whatever it's called, encyclopedia, I guess. But it's just become, it's such, we've got somebody here saying it's cured them of cancer, some, well-known person. And so all of a sudden it starts that persecution again of the animal. And so it's amazing how quickly a lie will destroy something and how difficult it is for the truth to then, clean up that lie.
Right.
So, yeah. So that's what the pangolin are. They're essentially, and also because they're, not, they're not killed because of this, but it's just a byproduct of habitat loss and climate changes. So that's also a factor.
Got it. All right. Well, I have some other questions, but we'll throw them a little bit closer towards the end.
All right. So we're just going to cruise. I've got a few pictures of my nature's redhead stepchildren that are, again, like talking about how these animals are perceived a certain way. And I know a lot of people are terrified of bats. These are fruit bats. I spent a lot of time with bats. I actually had, at one point I lived in a house on one of the reserves where the top floor was not actually a finished floor. So it was essentially almost like just tar paper between that floor and my house itself. And at a certain time of year, there were bats roosting up in that top area. And the mothers would go out to get food, and the babies were getting old enough that they would start exploring. And what would happen is they would just kind of drop down and then fall through my roof into my house.
Wow.
And I'd have these teeny tiny little baby bats just puttering around. And you can't, because that particular bat species, these are fruit bats, so these are diurnal, but the ones that we had were nocturnal. You don't want to bring them up to the roost in the middle of the night because you don't want to disturb the roost. You don't want to freak the parents out, and you don't want them to not come back to take care of the babies. So what I'd have to do is I'd fashion a little space that was a little bit enclosed that had a little heating pad, and I'd put the babies in there, and I'd have to feed them every 2 hours with milk, with I'd had baby formula that I kept on hand. I do not suggest anyone do this. If you're in a place where you can call someone to handle the bats, do it. I was essentially in the middle of nowhere and didn't have a choice but to do it myself. And I also had training in veterinary medicine, so that helps. But yeah, so, there's this perception again of bats being horrible, and they all carry rabies, and they are a vector species for rabies. They are not necessarily fruit bats, certainly the more of the nocturnal bats, but they're not like, they don't prey on humans. There are vampire bats, but they're not like actively going out and attacking people. They do eventually, sometimes here and there, will bite a human. But most of the time, like anything in this world, anything that bites you is biting you because it's defending itself. Unless you're talking about an animal that's very hungry, like a lion, in which case that's a whole other story. But most of these animals, they're not going to bother you unless they feel like they're threatened. And that's the only way that they're not going to be able to say, hey, get away from me, because we're not going to understand. They don't speak English or Spanish or whatever language. They speak bat. They speak, and so they have their own posturing that they're trying to communicate with us to say, hey, I'm not comfortable. Can you please move back? And if we're not listening or not paying attention, they're probably going to try to bite us, because that's their next line of defense. They're either going to run away, which is usually the first thing they're going to do, is to get away. That's the safest thing, because any of these animals want to avoid any sort of fight or injury, because they can't just walk to the doctor. If a lion decides to attack something and gets injured, it can't just go to the vet and be like, can you fix my paw? It's going to suffer, and it will probably die if it doesn't heal fast enough, or, if it gets any sort of disease or something. And anyway, so the baby bats bats are mammals. One of the things about mammals, and one that all mammals share, is that they drink milk as babies. So I was able to get baby formula, and I would literally nurse the bats like with these little tiny eyedroppers, and just give them little bits of milk every few hours. And then in the morning, I'd bring them back up to the roost when everybody was a little more calm, and they'd be fine, and off they'd go. And so it's, again, the perception that these animals are awful and scary and terrible, but yet they're very nurturing. Like that mother bat, they carry their babies. The moms will often carry their babies wrapped around them. And you'll see hyena are very similar as well. There's again, this sense, and I think Disney's definitely done a disservice. And I think they need to do a movie on hyena that is just happy hyena, because hyenas are really cool animals, and they are very social and very family oriented. And, the perception is, oh, they're just scavengers. The fact of the matter is, spotted hyena, which is what these guys are actually more successful predators than lion. They have a much higher success rate in terms of kills, and they actually go out and do more hunting on their own. And lions typically take more of their kills. Lions are more of the scavengers, particularly the male lions.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, little known facts. But these guys, they sort of keep to their own. It's not that they don't steal food from other, everybody is out there, they're all out there to survive. And so if there's an easy pickings thing, they'll go for it. But they will traditionally be, their own hunters and get their own food. And they're very warm and caring. It's interesting. It's funny that a lot of the very social animals tend to be matriarchal. So hyena are matriarchal, elephant tend to be matriarchal, or are matriarchal. killer whales are matriarchal. So there's a dominant female, and even the wild dogs are really more, there's a dominant male and a dominant female. And meerkats, there's a dominant male and a dominant female, but the dominant female really controls the situation. She can kick out the dominant male at any time. So she really is the one that sort of rules the show. So yeah, but again, you want to see these animals in these moments of, like you're just peering into their lives as opposed to them being posed in these traditional, stances that you see them in. I like them in these moments when they've just, like, the babies, this one on the bottom, those are newborns. Those are just coming out of the den, which is why they're still black the way they are. Their fur hasn't changed yet. I guess the one on the top is also, but a little bit older. And they're sweet and they're cute and they're playful, and they're just like these little moments of almost being like a nursery with the babies. And, you watch them with their mothers, and baboons and monkeys make me laugh because they do the same thing that human mothers do. Like, a baby is misbehaving and the mother will just grab the tail and pull it back and be like, child, simmer. And it cracks me up. But even animals like, frogs, a lot of people might not think of frogs as something that would be persecuted, but in a lot of cultures, frogs, again, are seen as portents of doom. They're seen as an indication of death. And so I remember being in the bush once, and one of the women that I worked with, she was screaming. Like, I thought she was getting mauled by something. I ran into the kitchen and she's looking, she's pointing, and she's got a pot in her hand. And I'm like, what is it? And she points down and there's a little toad. And she's like, get it out, get it out, get it out. Terrified of this thing. And then for the next few days, she was convinced she was going to die. And it's not to downplay or to sit there and criticize someone else's beliefs. It's just that the beliefs exist. And so trying to, get through all of this and connect with people in ways to sort of dispel beliefs while also being cognizant of people's beliefs and cultures. And again, showing, that's part of the reason why I like to show them in these sort of scenarios and in these moments, because I feel like it tears down those walls and tries, we're afraid of what we don't know, right? We're afraid of what we don't understand. We're afraid of what we don't. So the first step is to making something understandable and knowable. And I think the best way of doing that is to paint it in a light where you can connect with it.
Sure. And would you say that as you're shooting this work, when you begin to push for conservation efforts, you're having to adjust your portfolio or your visual storytelling per that culture? So for example, like you said, within the African village, they were terrified of the frog, versus if you were trying to do some things in the Amazon or in the rainforest and people wanted to use your image. Do you have a grasp yourself, or is this something you work with that local conservation group to give imagery to help with that?
The ideal thing is again, like the wildlife being integrated with us, is all the communities are also integrated as well. And one of the things I think that conservation has done wrong and is getting significantly better about now is that local communities have not been part of the conversation for a very long time. And they are now starting to be integrated. The local lore, the local understanding, the local medicine, they're starting to take that in and integrate it in, because conservation for a very long time was a white man's story. And that's, somebody coming down from Europe is not going to understand the intricacies of what's going on in these places because they didn't grow up with it. This isn't they're seeing it from completely different eyes, from a completely different perspective. Same with the Amazon. And local cultures have been living side by side with it. And so we need to integrate them in. It is vitally important to understand the value of everything, to understand how it works and serves a greater purpose for all of us, humans and other species. And like you said, being culturally sensitive and aware of how people see things, and trying to work with beliefs without criticizing a belief, because we might not agree with it, but finding ways to bridge the gap. Because the last thing you want to do when you're dealing with any of this stuff, and you're never going to get anyone to agree if you go out and tell them they're just stupid or they're dumb or that's a bad, or whatever it is, I don't agree with that. Or it's more finding ways to show this stuff where they can find a connection to it. Where I think if you showed the animal with its babies and you showed, I'm not saying that would necessarily work, but if you show it in a light, in a capacity that they could connect with, you can change the perception around something without telling someone they have to change their perception. And it's like any kind of knowledge. rather than saying, well, here are the facts, because the facts are great, they're there, but facts are not going to be what change people's hearts and minds. You got to touch
Sure.
people in the heart. And what do they care about? They care about their families. So if you show an animal in more a familial light, you're
Mhm.
going to automatically start changing somebody's way of seeing something.
Sure.
So it does,
And that,
you're right. You have to change everything that you do has to be tailored to who your audience is. So
sure.
if it means you have to shoot something in an entirely different capacity, you got to shoot in a different capacity.
And it's interesting that I want to go to a comment and then to a statement before we move on. But Angela said her great uncle Louis Martin was a National Geographic photographer, and she loves it very much when geographic inspires people. It was very special to her as well. And I'm of the age where the Yellow magazine was a massive influence on me becoming a photographer. However, I'm also of the age where the late great Steve Irwin
Yeah.
brought personality and took a lot of the stigma away. Every Saturday morning, I knew cartoons were over because Mutual of Omaha came on and the theme song started. But all it did was made me terrified to go somewhere where there was an apex predator. Just completely terrified. Like I had a belief that if I ever went to Africa, I was never going to water because crocodiles would grab me immediately. And then you fast forward over to Steve Irwin, and yes, that is a possibility. However, there are entire continents that deal with some of these animals. So yes, I thank you for that comment, Angela. And there are many people like yourself that are starting to shed a light. Again, not to say personification, because we agree that that's not the word, but shed a light of to show the actual living capabilities and cultures, not what we have been told for generations is happening. We are at the 10-minute mark, unfortunately. So if we want to
My
pop through
goodness.
some few more images.
Well, we'll probably go back. This is kind of going along with regards to the frog, a similar kind of thing. Reptiles, we have this feeling of reptiles. Amphibians obviously are frogs. This is a reptile, different. But again, this feeling that they're cold-blooded, they're very different from us. It's like snakes, this, which is also in here somewhere. We have this perception that it's so different for us, it's so alien from us that there can't possibly be anything, similar. And again, fascinating creatures, spending the time watching them and just not just seeing how they interact with them, each other, but also just to see how fascinating, like to watch a chameleon change color is kind of like way of watching an octopus change. It is incredible. If you watch that and you do not sit down and say nature is amazing, I feel like you are dead inside. I don't know. It's it's unreal. And
Yeah.
they do it so quickly. And it's like you're watching it happen. You're standing there watching it happen, and you still cannot believe what's going on in front of you.
Sure.
But again, there's elements of feeling that they're so separate from us because they're cold-blooded or they're, a lot of them snakes. I adore snakes. I did not adore snakes prior to going to South Africa. I did not really have much of a feeling about snakes prior to going to South Africa, mostly because I was like, well, it's a snake. Great. I should avoid the ones that will bite me and potentially kill me. The rest of them, they eat mice. It's great. They keep them out of the house. It's fine. But what I was really fascinated about with the snakes is each snake, again, much like every other species in the world, does its own thing, its own way. Some snakes bear live young and they stay with them. I did not know this until last year that garter snakes are social. That garter snakes will actually hang out together. Like you'll often see snakes will come together for a mating ball where a lot of the males will sort of hoard a female. But garter snakes will literally come and chill with each other and just hang.
Wow.
Had no idea. But again, there's a perception that they're so deadly. And I think so much of it comes from the fact they are wildly different than us. They don't have, well, they do, but you don't see them. Their arms and legs have essentially devolved into nothing, and you wouldn't see it anyway because of the way the skin, they crawl on their bellies and they have a tail, even though they look like they're all tail. And they're terrifying because you're going to die from a snake. The vast majority of snakes in the world are non-venomous, first of all. Second of all, they want nothing to do with us. They have the only way they have to defend themselves is to bite us.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't want, especially if they're a venomous snake, they don't want to waste their venom on something that they can't eat.
Mm-hmm.
They conserve. Any animal out there they're very smart about this stuff. They conserve their energy for what is going to serve them. And the only reason they would lash out is to protect themselves. They're not just vicious, deadly. People there are stories of mambas chasing people. And yeah, sometimes a mamba will get angry and it will just chase you away. But I've had a mamba, a black mamba in my bathroom. And I'll tell you, all that snake wanted to do was get by me and get out of there and just hide, which is what he did. Unfortunately, it was under my bed. So we had to
Oh,
we had to then get someone to come in with a snake stick and relocate him, because I was like, yeah, that's not they're very cool. I'm not touching that at all with anything. Let someone
yes.
else who knows how to handle
Yeah.
them. Uh,
Probably for the best.
yeah, but I mean, people will automatically kill snakes, but snakes eat all of these. They eat moles, they eat rats, they eat mice. They keep away. Mice carry all kinds of disease, and rats carry they all
Mhm.
kinds of diseases you don't want in your house. You don't want mice with hantavirus in your house.
Mm.
It's not good. These guys keep out their natural pest control.
Yeah.
So while you wouldn't necessarily want a venomous snake hanging out by your house, because it could be, a garter snake or a mole snake or a rat, they're fantastic. They're actually great to have around. It's and like bats are great to have around. Bats kill mosquitoes. They eat mosquitoes.
Yeah.
Why would you not want, like
Yeah.
I like
I don't enjoy
everything
getting bit
except for
by
mosquitoes.
mosquitoes. Well, so unfortunately, I would love to do this all day. We have gotten to a point, and I love the image you brought up of the praying mantis, and we can get to that in a second. But you have got a ton of questions,
Oh,
so I'd like to be able to take some time to really interact and engage with the questions. I'm going to start out with one because you definitely have a very, very unique approach to your documentation of wildlife. And Angela asks, she says, I'm curious about the process behind creating these images. How much of this do you manage to capture in the field versus how much of this is done in post?
Oh, the vast majority is in the field. I'm a firm believer if you can't get it in the field, you need to get better at photography. I mean, not that I don't think no, and I know that sounds really obnoxious. I'm sorry, but I
No,
really do believe that you have to learn your equipment. And the first step in photography and any kind of art, I think, is understanding how art works and its composition and learning design, because design is what makes a great image. It's, your use of texture, your use of shadow, your use of color, your use of shapes, your negative space versus your positive space. I studied design in college, and I think that might have been part of the reason why I sort of had a natural ability for photography, because I just naturally seem to understand where things fit in the where they should fit.
mhm,
Um, that's not to say that I won't crop something down, because honestly, you also, a lot of times you have to be far enough from the animals that you're not disturbing the animals.
right,
So, a lot of these close-ups, unless you've got a crazy, crazy lens, they're going to be far away. You got to crop it in. But in terms of editing a whole, I try not to. I really try to get everything I can in camera. If I've got to bring up a few shadows here and there, then yeah, I'll probably do that. But I don't like to touch it, because I really just want things to be the way they are. I really want people
yeah,
like this. The reason for the praying mantis, the reason I used the praying mantis pictures in the book as opposed to drawing characters, I wanted them to see him as the
right,
real thing, because the real thing without all the manipulation is what's out there. And that's what we need to love. That's what we need to care about. Not something that we've, embellished and turned into something it's not. I feel like
right.
the more we add, the more we're actually taking away.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And the reason I chuckled is that there seems to be a very true statement within grabbing the image correctly in the field, and then you can alter for intent when you get back for an artistic perspective. But that seems to be the standard. Unfortunately, we're going so quick. I have one last question, and then we will have to segue over. But Ian asked, how important is data visualization in your storytelling with regards to conservation?
I'm not sure what he means by that.
How often are you shooting specifically for conservation versus shooting to document or shooting because you are driving towards image gathering, if I understand you correctly, Ian? Like, how much of this is driven directly towards conservation efforts?
I honestly think everything that I do is I guess tri-purposed. When I'm out there, I'm always thinking all three. I'm thinking, getting more images, because I always feel like it's good to have more images, because it's also practice too. I'm like, I will play all the time at my backyard with birds in flight just to keep my skills sharp with that. But also because I feel like, again, it's important to capture what's in your backyard and to show how amazing just what's outside your door is, which also factors into conservation. And whether I can use those for an Audubon type thing or not, would be great. But I think my mindset when I'm taking the photography is always, it's really just capturing the beauty of it and the amazingness of it. And with the hopes that it will turn into something bigger, although it might not always be precisely for that at the exact time.
Right.
So, I mean, some things are specific to, I've got a job, this is what I need to do. But for the most part, whenever I'm taking photos, I'm thinking all three. I'm thinking image acquisition. I'm thinking, for my own self. I'm thinking for a project and for, the purposes of whatever it is I'm trying to get across.
Fantastic. And we are at the hour. We're actually spilling a little bit over. So for all of you that are in attendance, please stick around for Dave Mullen. Jennifer, I'd like to ask you if you have the time to stick around off camera, and you can interact in the chat with some of these questions if you'd like.
Oh, yeah,
because we had a
absolutely.
myriad of questions. We just simply ran out of time to get. So for any of you that did not have your question answered, Jennifer will be here. We will be focusing on Dave Mullen and expedition photography. However, we can always take a look at the presentation afterwards, and we can interact. So we're going to go ahead and drop in a real quick screen share just to have a transfer over of presentation. But Jennifer, as always, absolutely a pleasure speaking with you. I knew when we set this up for an hour that an hour was not